Did you know that Galileo Galilei, the famed Italian astronomer and physicist, was the first person to observe the moons of Jupiter through a telescope? This discovery was just one of many achievements that solidified Galileo's legacy as a pivotal figure in the history of science. Join us as we delve into the remarkable story of Galileo Galilei. Galileo was born on February 15, 1564, in Pisa, Italy, as the eldest of 7 children to Giulia Ammannati and Vincenzo Galilei. His father was a talented lute musician and wool trader who, due to his courtly connections and frequent travels, hoped Galileo would pursue a career in medicine for its financial prospects. Originally named Bonaiuti, the family adopted the surname Galilei in honor of their distinguished ancestor, Galileo Bonaiuti, a respected physician and public figure in Pisa. This ancestral legacy gave rise to Galileo Galilei's doubly significant name. During his childhood, Galileo demonstrated a fascination with mechanics by crafting models of ships and watermills. He also developed impressive musical skills, mastered the lute to a professional level, and displayed artistic talent in painting and drawing. Initially educated under Jacopo Bornini, Galileo later pursued formal studies at the Camaldolese monastery at Villambrosa, focusing on grammar, logic, and rhetoric. He became a novice within the monastery after 4 years, a decision that diverged from his father's aspirations. Consequently, Galileo was swiftly withdrawn from the monastery. In 1581, at the age of 17, he enrolled at the University of Pisa to pursue medical studies in line with his father's wishes. At the age of 20, Galileo's curiosity was sparked by a swinging lamp in a cathedral. Intrigued by its motion, he timed the swings using his pulse and observed a remarkable discovery. Regardless of the size of the swing, each pendulum took the same amount of time to complete its motion. This revelation, known as the law of the pendulum, earned Galileo instant fame and would later prove instrumental in the development of clock regulation techniques. Aside from mathematics, Galileo quickly grew disinterested in university life and the study of medicine. Against convention, he attended a lecture given by court mathematician Ostiio Ricci. Intrigued, Galileo delved into further study on his own by reading Euclid. He impressed Ricci greatly by submitting a set of questions based on his independent learning. Galileo's family initially viewed his focus on mathematics as secondary to his medical studies. However, upon learning that Galileo was at risk of failing out of university, Vincenzo negotiated a compromise. Galileo would receive full-time tutoring in mathematics from Ricci. While Vincenzo was not thrilled about this arrangement due to the perceived limited earning potential of a mathematician, he hoped it would enable Galileo to successfully complete his college education. Unfortunately, the compromise did not prove successful, as Galileo ultimately left the University of Pisa without obtaining a degree. Following his departure from university, Galileo turned to tutoring mathematics to support himself. During this time, he conducted experiments with floating objects and devised a balance capable of determining specific densities, such as gold being 19.3 times denser than water per unit volume. Alongside these pursuits, Galileo passionately pursued his lifelong ambition, securing a position on the mathematics faculty at a prestigious university. Despite his undeniable brilliance, Galileo's outspoken nature had alienated many figures in the academic community, leading to his repeated disappointment as other candidates were chosen for available positions. Ironically, Galileo's fortunes took a turn during a lecture on literature. The Academy of Florence had been embroiled in a century-old debate over the location, shape, and dimensions of Dante's Inferno. Galileo saw an opportunity to address this question scientifically. Drawing from Dante's description of the giant Nimrod, whose face was about as long and just as wide as St. Peter's cone in Rome, Galileo calculated that Lucifer himself was 2,000 arm lengths long. This scientific interpretation impressed the audience, leading to Galileo's appointment to the University of Pisa within the year, a significant achievement given to him by the same university that had previously denied him a degree. Upon Galileo's arrival at the university, discussions had already begun regarding one of Aristotle's laws of nature, the notion that heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones. Aristotle's assertions had been widely regarded as indisputable truths, and there had been minimal efforts to experimentally validate or challenge his conclusions. Legend has it that Galileo decided to put Aristotle's theory to the test. He required a significant height from which to drop objects, and conveniently the Tower of Pisa, standing at 54 meters or 177 feet tall, offered the perfect vantage point. Galileo ascended to the top of the tower with balls of different sizes and weights, and he released them simultaneously. To the amazement of a large crowd of students and professors, all the balls reached the base of the tower at the same time. This demonstration decisively proved Aristotle wrong. Galileo Galilei transitioned to the University of Padua. By 1593, he faced financial desperation, having assumed the role of family head following his father's passing. Mounting debts, notably a significant debt for one of his sisters, payable over decades, added to his burden. To alleviate his financial woes, Galileo sought to invent a lucrative device. His early creations, an elementary thermometer that could measure temperature variations, and an innovative water-raising device, failed to find market success. However, in 1596, he struck gold with a military compass designed to precisely aim cannonballs. A civilian adaptation for land surveying followed in 1597, proving profitable for Galileo. He maximized profits by selling the instruments at triple the production cost. While vacationing in Venice in 1609, Galileo Galilei caught wind of rumors surrounding a Dutch spectacle maker who had developed a device capable of magnifying distant objects, initially known as a spyglass, and later named the telescope. Although a patent for this invention was pending, the details were shrouded in secrecy due to its significant military implications for Holland. Galileo was determined to replicate the spyglass. With only instinct and bits of hearsay to guide him, having never seen the Dutch invention firsthand, he embarked on a frantic 24-hour period of experimentation and successfully constructed a 3-power telescope. After refining his design, Galileo presented a 10-power telescope to the Venetian Senate, leaving them deeply impressed. In recognition of his achievement, Galileo received a raise in salary and was honored with proclamations. Had Galileo Galilei stopped there and embraced a life of wealth and leisure, he might have been a mere footnote in history. Instead, a revolution was ignited when, on a crisp fall evening, the scientist turned his telescope toward an object in the sky that was universally believed to be a perfect, smooth, polished celestial body, the Moon. To his astonishment, Galileo beheld a lunar surface that was uneven, rough, and marked with cavities and prominences. Despite his observations, many insisted that Galileo was mistaken. One mathematician even argued that if the Moon appeared rough, it must be due to an invisible, transparent, smooth crystal covering the entire lunar surface. Months passed and Galileo's telescopes continued to improve. On January 7, 1610, he directed his 30-power telescope toward Jupiter and noticed 3 small bright stars near the planet, 2 to the east and 1 to the west, all aligned in a straight line. The next evening, Galileo observed Jupiter again and saw that all 3 stars had shifted to the west of the planet, still in a straight line. Subsequent observations in the following weeks led Galileo to a groundbreaking conclusion. These small stars were actually tiny satellites orbiting around Jupiter. This revelation raised a profound question. If there were satellites orbiting a planet other than Earth, could it be possible that Earth was not the center of the universe? Might the Copernican idea of placing the Sun at the center of the solar system be correct? Galileo Galilei documented his discoveries in a concise book titled The Starry Messenger, which was published in March 1610, with a print run of 550 copies. The publication garnered immense public excitement and acclaim. Notably, this was the only one of Galileo's works written in Latin. Most of his writings were in Italian. More discoveries unfolded through Galileo's new telescope. Peculiar bumps near the planet Saturn, which were actually the edges of Saturn's rings. Observations of spots on the Sun's surface, and witnessing Venus transform from a full disk to a slender crescent of light. For Galileo Galilei, advocating that the Earth orbited the Sun signified a profound shift, as he directly contradicted the teachings of the Catholic Church. While some mathematicians within the Church affirmed the accuracy of his observations, many members held firm in their skepticism. In December 1613, a friend informed Galileo about a prominent noblewoman who questioned the validity of his findings, citing a passage from Joshua where God halted the sun and prolonged the day. This biblical reference, she argued, implied that the sun revolved around the earth. Galileo was religious. He acknowledged that the Bible could not be wrong. However, he argued that the interpreters of the Bible could be, emphasizing that it was a mistake to interpret the Bible too literally. This viewpoint was a significant departure from the prevailing belief of the time, where only church priests were authorized to interpret Scripture or define God's intentions. Common individuals were not permitted to do so. As Galileo's ideas gained traction, some clergy members reacted with accusations of heresy. These accusations escalated when certain clerics brought their concerns to the Inquisition, the Catholic Church court responsible for investigating charges of heresy, formally accusing Galileo Galilei. This was an extraordinarily grave development, as illustrated by the fate of Giordano Bruno in 1600, who was convicted of heresy for advocating that the Earth orbited the Sun and that life existed on other planets. Bruno was executed by burning at the stake. Initially, Galileo was acquitted of all charges, but was cautioned against teaching the Copernican system. In the subsequent years, Galileo engaged in diverse pursuits. Using his telescope, he observed the movements of Jupiter's moons, documenting them in a detailed list. He then devised a method to utilize these celestial measurements for navigation purposes. As a side interest, Galileo turned his attention to studying ocean tides. Rather than presenting his ideas in a traditional scientific paper, he adopted a more captivating approach by framing his arguments as an imaginary dialogue between three fictional characters. One character, representing Galileo's viewpoint, was portrayed as brilliant and persuasive. Another character remained open-minded and impartial, while the third character, named Simplicio, embodied dogmatism and ignorance, symbolizing those who opposed Galileo's ideas without considering evidence to the contrary. This narrative style proved so effective that Galileo employed it again in his later work, titled Dialogue on the Two Great Systems of the World, which focused on the Copernican system. The publication of Dialogue was an immediate success among the public, but incurred the wrath of the Church. Suspecting that he was the inspiration for the character Simplicio, the Pope ordered the book to be banned and summoned Galileo Galilei to appear before the Inquisition in Rome for the crime of promoting the Copernican theory against direct orders. At 68 years old and in poor health, Galileo faced the threat of torture. He publicly recanted his support for the heliocentric theory, admitting that he had been mistaken in asserting that the Earth orbits the Sun. Legend has it that after his confession, Galileo quietly murmured, "And yet, it moves." Despite his condemnation, Galileo was spared a harsher punishment and allowed to live under house arrest at his home outside Florence, near one of his daughters, who was a nun. Until his death in 1642, he continued to explore other scientific inquiries. Remarkably, he even authored a book on force and motion, despite being blinded by an eye infection. The ban on Galileo's Dialogue was lifted by the Church in 1822, by which time it was widely accepted that the Earth was not the center of the universe. Subsequently, statements from the Vatican Council in the early 1960s and in 1979 suggested that Galileo had been pardoned and had unjustly suffered at the hands of the Church. Finally, in 1992, following the launch of the Galileo spacecraft to Jupiter 3 years earlier, the Vatican formally and publicly exonerated Galileo Galilei of any wrongdoing.